couple words. In that, in a free society, reputation is how we promote good actors without using coercion. And I believe that the sign of a peaceful world is when folks choose their associates based on their reputation, removing the need for the state to be involved at all. And it starts with us living by our reputations. And in that world, as in this one, I would freely choose to associate with Mr. Patrick Byrne. Right? Mr. Byrne has a great reputation as an entrepreneur, building Overstock.com to IPO in 2002 and beyond. As an activist on Wall Street, as a student and teacher of philosophy. Mr. Byrne gave a riveting talk about the history of freedom and liberty as the keynote speaker at Porcfest 11, where we got to shake hands the first time. And though I was there, I've rewatched his talk several times. It's quite inspiring. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you do. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce him here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Patrick Byrne.
Not to be confused with any other red hats that you may see right now. Make Bitcoin great again. For those who can't read, my father always said the odds are the second thing to go. So it's a great honor. You do me such an honor to ask me to come back and speak to you, and it's kind of shocking to me. I don't quite understand what role I have in this community other than to come and tell stories. The African, West Africa culture has a tradition of what they call a griot. A griot is the oral storyteller of each tribe. And it's the old man or old women who remember the tribe's lore and history, and their function is to tell it and retell it and to the youth and the members of the tribe. That's especially important in the case of our tribe because it is fundamentally an intellectual tribe. It's a tribe defined by its values and its concepts. And so it's especially, and those concepts have had a tendency to get distorted over time, or people taking advantage of it didn't really understand them. So for that reason, I think it's especially important. And maybe it's just all I can contribute. I'm reminded of driving up here yesterday through Franconia Notch. And God, by the way, although I've come and spoken a couple times, I've never made the full commitment to spend 4 days here. And I could show you the text. This morning having spent yesterday afternoon and evening here, and having such a good time, I already texted my office this morning saying, book in cement, that I'm going to be here for the full 4 days next year, staying in that because you're my people. So if you will indulge me, I'd like to take this opportunity. I'm going to talk again, and some of this is going to be history and philosophy. I always warn people when I get invited, oh, there's a great joke. The great joke is a guy sitting next to a woman on an airplane, and he sees this enormous diamond on her rock, enormous rock on her finger, diamond, and he says, my gosh, madam, that is the biggest diamond I've ever seen. He says, oh, this is the famous Clopfield diamond, the world famous Clopfield diamond. And he says, really? And she says, yes, but it comes with a Clopfield curse. And he says, what's that? She says, Mr. Clopfield. So you invite a guy who spent much of his life reading history and philosophy to come talk. The curse is you're going to hear a lot of history and philosophy. And the one I want to start with happened just in Franconia. And tell you a little bit that New Hampshire has really a very special place in the history of the freedom movement. And there's an aspect that people don't know, so I'm just going to take a couple minutes to review the history of the anti-slavery movement in the United States. There used to be two-part, well, first of all, in 1820, it was the issue that our Constitution really didn't resolve. They couldn't, they got it through, but it was really unresolved, and they thought it would be left to another day. There were two ways of opposing slavery. One, they say the more moderate position was we're going to try to contain it, and this horrible institution will die out on its own, and the more aggressive version was we're going to go confront it. The two parties in the United States at the time were the Democrats and the Whigs. And the Democrats were pro-slavery, of course, and the Whigs were really a moderate position. And this was exemplified in 1820. A deal was made to admit Maine as a state, and the South didn't want a free state without another slave state, and they admitted Maine and Missouri together. That was in 1820, that was the Missouri Compromise. And from then on, the thinking was that they were going to admit 2 states at a time, free and slave. That deal was broken, as the authoritarians always do. It was broken in a number of ways, but the key way was in 1854, there was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act said, we're going to leave it up to the inhabitants of each state to decide. So they were reneging on the deal. At that point, a man named Amos Tuck, after whom there's a business school at Dartmouth named, came up here in a tavern in Franconia Notch. A small group of men got together and decided to form a new party whose total purpose was the abolition of slavery. And a few weeks later, he went down to Exeter and presented this idea, and that was that was the birth of the Republican Party. And in 1856, they ran their first presidential candidate, John Fremont, who won, I think, 11 states. And in 1860, they elected Abraham Lincoln. So New Hampshire has this very special place in that history. And I think of it every time I drive through Franconia Notch. So, my job, I've got an hour, and I'm going to speak for, if they can keep me on time, I aim to speak for about 40 or 45 minutes, and take questions. I'll try to, but there are times when I get together, I want to tell my tribe, remind people of what our shared history is, because there are people who get here because they don't like taxes, people who get here because they like blockchain, people who want to legalize weed, all of getting education, there's all these different issues that bring us together, but there's actually a common denominator to our history. This is what it is. I have to say, I'm not a religious person in any conventional sense, but you really have to begin our story with an episode in the book of Daniel, where Belshazzar is having a party, the king of Babylon, and this hidden hand, an unseen hand writes on the wall. Hence we get the expression, writing on the wall, 3 words, and what they all mean, but one of the words means balance, and he asks his wise men to interpret it, no one can interpret it, and they call for Daniel, and Daniel comes, and he interprets that word, and the other ones were, he interprets as, I've seen gods with feet of clay. Second, you have been judged in the balance and found wanting, and the third, Parsi, means that the Persians are going to take your empire. Well, that second one, you have been judged in the balance and found wanting, was an inspirational moment, because until then, the political authority and divine authority had never conceptually been divided. That was the first time, it seems, man conceived that there is some balance within which we can judge political authority. It's not a sun king, it's a political authority, and there is some external standard by which it can be judged. The Greeks are known a few hundred years later for giving us voting. They also gave us something really important that we have forgotten. It's called sortition. Sortition names the way we choose jurors in a trial. You're a citizen and you are randomly called once in a while to perform this duty. In the history of the Athenian city-state, there was one stable period. They tried many different types of constitutions. There was one, and they had all the problems that we have. They had all kinds of dislocations, which I'll be getting to in a minute. but there was one period that was stable, and oligarchies formed, and tyrants formed, and all this stuff. One period was stable, and that's when they chose legislators like we choose juries. And it turned out, and that created a very stable period, I think of about 93 years, if I remember correctly. And why that worked, I think, is because the fundamental problem of the world we're pursuing is that our institutions get captured, they get corrupted. And you can break that up. I mean, one of our deep problems, we have legislators in Washington who have made a career out of being politicians, and they become captured by different interests. And imagine what would happen if you, I mean, it's implausible what would happen today, I suppose, but imagine what would happen if you chose congressmen randomly out of the phone book and it turned over. There'd be no way the lobbies could capture that. Anyway, it was the most stable period in Greek history. But the real breakthrough, and as an entrepreneur, I want to address this aspect, came in Rome about 110 BC. There was a Greek, most of the affluent families of Rome each had a Greek slave professor who's tutored to the kids and stuff. It was considered a high-class thing to do. There was a Greek named Polybius who wrote a history of Rome, and he said he had found the reason that the Roman Republic had worked and created the grandest civilization known to man, and it was he had a theory of history that's important to know. The theory was that forms of government go through, I warned you, right? A philosopher at lunch, you get a philosopher. The problem is all forms of government go from benevolent to malevolent forms. So you have some primitive man against man, no structure system, and a king emerges, a strong man emerges. And that king is generally well admired and liked and such, but eventually the kingship, either himself or through his son, turns into a tyranny. Well, once it's a tyranny, the nobles around the king take over, and they bring it back, and you get an aristocracy. And that works for a while, but aristocracies degenerate to oligarchies. And once the oligarchies get bad enough and exploitative enough, the people take over, and you get democracy. And we have democracy until it degenerates into mob rule. And then when it's mob rule, the thing collapses and it all starts over again. That's the cycle of history. But the Romans had discovered the secret, he wrote, of breaking that cycle and freezing it where it belonged in democracy. And that was polycentricity. What polycentricity is a word that just means you have many centers of gravity for policy, for decision making. So you don't have all decisions falling up to one person, but in the Roman Republic there were different types. There were institutions like the Senate, and one for something more like our House, and we had courts and this and that, and you were breaking decisions up, and by breaking them up, no one political agent could get too powerful. It's a key when I think of what's going on in America, and as an entrepreneur, and I run a company with 2,000 people in it, but we support 4,000 other companies as a platform that sell through our site. And by the way, on that note, I've already run into some people here, a fellow who sells grape, maple, kettle corn, and other things. If any of you are entrepreneurs who have an interest in selling your product online, we give a much better deal than Amazon. Drop me an email at patrick@overstock.com. We build million-dollar businesses for people who work with us. Thank you. This gentleman. So, as an innovator, I'm basically in the job of institutional design at this point. I'm designing and redesigning the institutions of our enterprise. And this idea of polycentricity is so important. Top-down stuff doesn't work. You have to have, for there to be innovation and innovative thinking, it is so helpful for there to be, that can go on in many different places. And the real strength have many great strengths, but one of them is overlooked and not defended ardently enough, and that is, wherever possible, you want decisions made at the state level or local. Imagine if we were a society. I'm not going for, that's very kind. I mean, it's funny, I'm not going to the applause. I'm used to just talking history. It's nice to hear that people get that, because if you have, imagine if we were, as we started, a country with a laboratory for policy innovation, and 13 states or 50 states all trying different ways of solving the same problem. You know, I have lots of theories about how to solve healthcare or what to do about the minimum wage or all kinds of things. The truth is I don't know and you don't know and nobody knows. How brilliant it would be if you had 50 different governors in 50 different states trying to solve the social problems that get solved, and everyone could see what works and what doesn't work, and its success would get emulated and such. That's the real powerful engine to me, that one of the great factors that made America succeed. It is. Say again?
Make America states again.
Hey. We have homogenized so much policy decision at the federal level that is just absolutely killing that great advantage that we started with. You don't want wherever you possible. Now, some policies have to be federal, like the national defense question, or things like that. Maintaining, regulating commerce among the settler states, for example. In fact, there's this thing called Article 1, Section 8, which has a list of the things that are appropriate to do at the federal level. But beyond that, as much needs to be at the state. And that is actually, and that can be, and even that can be, that insight really traces back to this fellow Polybius. Everybody learns in high school about the role that the English played with the Magna Carta and such, which is the first it documents the idea of the sovereign is limited. Now, it was limited by, this is just 1215, just over 800 years ago. The sovereign was limited, said the nobles, and they extracted these guarantees from him. And thus begins our tradition of limited government. And there were particular guarantees in there that become important, including one section that says property, that the king isn't going to arbitrarily take property. That got, a few decades later, William of Ockham. If you ever study philosophy, there's something called Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is to be referred, that William of Ockham wrote a lot about property. And it was first articulated there, the idea that government, when it takes the justness, that the thing that justifies government taking a property is they have to be willing to compensate the market rate. There's an incredible economic logic in that was not figured out for 800 years. In the mid-'80s, a wonderful libertarian jurisprudence professor named Richard Epstein, who's a great law professor on our side, he analyzed the real economic logic of that, is that if someone's taking $1 million, if the government were going to say we're seizing $1 million farm in order to create a public baseball park, that baseball park, if it's only really worth, say, $300,000 to the community, then the government can't afford to seize the farm to pay $1 million to create if they're creating something worth $1.5 million, they could theoretically seize the farm and create some public thing that was worth $1.5 million, and they can afford to pay that $1 million. But if they're creating something worth less than that $1 million, then they can't afford to pay for it. And so that restraint on government has this real economic logic, because you don't want government wiping out $1 million of value here to create $300,000 of value there. If you did, then there's always something called a Pareto dominant alternative. There's always a better deal. How about we only take 900,000, we'll give you 400,000. There's some other better deal they could make. So that restraint actually goes back 800 years. And the logic of it, the economic logic, was only teased out a few decades ago. And then my personal favorite are the Dutch. I'm going to be wrapping up this history lesson shortly. I'm getting into more modern stuff. But the Dutch don't get nearly as enough credit in our movement as they should. The Dutch were a bunch of folks like you who moved to a swamp on the northwest coast of Europe because they really didn't want to be ruled by anybody. They were agoristic? They were agoristic. They figured if they cooperated, they could drain the swamps, create land, live there, and build a society without this. They had to work out voluntarily the rules of their cooperation. And they came up with this vision of government that was quite different than anything before. And the vision was that government isn't this thing above us. It's like hiring a plumber. It's a bunch of things we can't do individually. You need some organization to do, but it's just this plumber that we hire in order to achieve whatever it is we're trying to achieve. Milton Friedman had a great line that illustrated this. If you remember the Kennedy inaugural address, he made this famous quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And Milton Friedman said, it's clear from the context, he's talking about your government. And that would be a horrible thing to say in any society that still understood freedom. Because if you understand freedom, you understand, that's a lot like you've hired a plumber who's come in, they've done a lousy job for you, and they're charging a lot of money. And then they're saying, don't ask what I can do for you, ask what you can do for me. You'd say that the plumber had forgotten, he misunderstood the relationship. That's the correct understanding of our relationship to government. In the values of a trading society like Holland, trade, as you know, is all about consent, consensual exchange. So consent, this philosophy emerged there. First, I'm just going to keep dropping names as I go. Erasmus, who was a Catholic theologian who was the first to articulate ideas of religious freedom and political, religious tolerance and political pluralism. A society where it isn't like we all have to agree that one answer is the right answer. How do we define a society so that we can tolerate different political interests and we'll work it out? And of course, religious toleration. And also, the great one, and a man, if you ever get interested in the sort of the birth of modern philosophy, you would start with a Jewish philosopher named Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza. And he did something extraordinary in his ethics. And basically what he did was he argued for an ethical system that was about recognizing the God within the other person, right? That God had a seat in every person. Now, whether you're religious or not, that you can see how that sort of thinking, that tradition is where our tradition of the consent of the governed started. Because if we are beings, per Spinoza, who have that in them, then we are agents whose consent matters. And that's where really our tradition, I put the birth of our tradition in Holland, a real liberal tradition. Liberalism correctly, the way they use it on television, liberalism does not mean Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Liberalism, classical liberalism, true liberalism is what we are. They stopped in the 30s, they could no longer sell socialism as socialism, so they stole our word. But it really started there in Holland. And two things happened, two flukes. One, a group of English Protestants who were getting oppressed, Brownian they were, they fled England to Holland. They lived in Holland for 20 years, in Rotterdam, and they learned this, they imbibed this philosophy. This is how they started seeing the world. And they ended up being distressed about the effect Amsterdam was having, the malicious and wicked effects Amsterdam was having on their children, which is why I like to go to Amsterdam every chance I get. And they sailed to America and be known as the Pilgrims. And we get taught in high school, they brought this religious toleration over from England. It's not true. They learned all this in Holland. As did another man, John Locke, who sat out the Glorious Revolution in 1688. And he sat out, he was going to be beheaded, there was a warrant for his arrest, and he sat it out for 3 years in Amsterdam. And by living through London, anyone who lives 3 years in Amsterdam comes out a classical liberal. And he went back to England and he wrote this book, The Second Treatise of Government, which all of our founding fathers read and became the philosophical inspiration for our Constitution. The idea that we are the beings with rights and we create this corporation that we empower. We give up a certain number of our rights and we empower it with certain powers so that we can better protect our rights and pursue life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, as John Locke put it. And that's our founding contract, the Declaration and the Constitution. There was a flaw. Our founding fathers knew there was a flaw in this system. And it's described in Federalist number 10 by James Madison. The Federalist Papers, remember, were when they were writing, trying to convince the American people to adopt, to go ahead and sign off on the Constitution. And Federalist number 10 says that we have studied all the previous attempts at democracy, ancient and modern. We have seen their flaws, we analyzed what made them crack. By the way, our founding fathers were very knowledgeable about this history. Thomas Jefferson in particular was a great student of the classics, but all of them read Polybius. All of them also read, I guess I'll take one little diversion. Something went on in Spain that I love telling this story. 400 years ago in Spain, there was a university, the University of Salamanca, and a philosophical school developed called the Scholastics. And the Scholastics were Jesuit and Dominican priests. And they noticed things. They noticed things that no one had ever noticed before. They don't get nearly the credit they should in the history of economics. They noticed, for example, the great influx of gold from the New World created inflation. And that caused them to formulate the quantity theory of money. That more money, they understood value. Philosophers until then wondered how value, how does value get into an object? There's the labor theory of value, which, it has some function, how much labor went into it. So they were the ones who first said there is no value intrinsic in an object. It's a question of the value to someone. A subjective theory of value. It's how much someone needs it. It's really a statement about how much they need it and how scarce it is. And so they formulated what we now know is called the subjective theory of value, which in universities they teach. That was formulated in the 1880s by a fellow Cambridge named Marshall. It wasn't. The Scholastics had it. Because of that, they also understood that, people were still locked on this idea that you could have rules, that the government was still supposed to determine things like value and what should be, and make a lot more decisions in the economy, like the mercantilist tradition, than we would say. And what they did was they had, there was even a line in the work of Mariana, this great one, that said something like, even if this would be so complex a question, even if in the infinite mind of God, if the God knew exactly how each person valued everything, the calculation then of what the correct price would be so overwhelming, even the infinite mind of God could not achieve it. And so prices have to be set free, and they will find, as people go about their activities, they find their balance. They find where they're supposed to be. And that's a deep insight. That was a great debate among economists in the 20th century. It's called the impossibility of socialist calculation. Hayek weighed on that. That speaks of the movement. Well, again, the Spanish figured that out. And the value of entrepreneurship, the importance of entrepreneurship, it's not expropriating from people. Entrepreneurs are serving people. They're looking for imbalances and finding ways to serve people by correcting the imbalances. So what's interesting is, all these ideas floated around to the eastern edge of where Spain ruled. And Spain at the time was most of Europe, with the exception of France, a patch of France. And these ideas floated to Vienna. And it went into hibernation for 250 years. And and then they emerged 150 years ago as the Austrian School of Economics. So if there are any Austrian theorists here, and I guess there's a lot of people who are familiar, our ideas really come from the school in Salomon. Sorry, I keep on hearing it. It's acoustics are funny when people shout out there. It's like it comes through. Okay, the big flaw in this system that they identified that was, oh, by the way, Jefferson sent, Juan de Mariana wrote a book, The History of Spain, that Jefferson, which has a bunch of these insights in it, and Jefferson sent it to all the other founding fathers as they were designing the Constitution. And these lessons, they understood these lessons. Federalist number 10 says, there's one problem we haven't solved, and that's the problem of what they call faction. What we used to call special interests. But I think a better way to think of special interests is the concept of regulatory capture. Economists, I'm hearing just someone talk. Is someone on the phone or something up here? Okay, thanks. It's funny, it bounces rather quickly here. Institutions get captured. We set up institutions like regulators to protect us from industries. Society does. But what happens is those institutions get taken over. Those regulators get taken over by the industries they're supposed to regulate. Exemplar gratis, the SEC and Wall Street. But it's really the history right back to the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. It was first with railroads, then with trucking. The ICC, the Commerce Commission, was the first regulator in the world, as we would understand it. And they regulated the train industry by setting carriage rates artificially high, so everyone in the railroad industry made mega profits, and restricting new entrants into the field. And then if you were a good boy and you regulated that way, after 10 or 15 years, you get a job on one of the board of directors of one of the railroad companies you can regulate. Same thing happened with the trucking industry in the 1930s. That's a very common feature of regulation. It happens all over the world. It's called regulatory capture. I started writing, though, 13 years ago about a deeper form of capture. It's not just our regulators. I was kind of a one-man Occupy Wall Street back from 04 to 08 until a few other million people showed up and did it for me. But it's not just the SEC. It's not just the regulators. The politicians who oversee the regulators are captured. The House Financial Services Committee, the Senate Banking Committee, even the press was captured. I mean, everybody, I'm reminded there's a story about Bertrand Russell, this English philosopher who was over teaching in India in the 1920s. And he was teaching Einstein's theory of relativity, and somebody stood up and said, a Hindu professor stood up in the back and said, "Professor Russell, that's incorrect. The truth is the universe rides on the back of a turtle." And Russell says, "Okay, well, what's the turtle ride on?" And the fellow says, "It rides on the back of another turtle." And he says, "Okay, what's that turtle ride on?" The fellow says, "I'm sorry, Russell, it's turtles all the way down." Well, in 04, I had absolutely, as a public company CEO, you're out there in the mix, you're mixing up with hedge funds and prime brokers and all kinds of forces and regulators and journalists, and it was really easy to discover there was a bunch of mischief going on, primarily because I was asked to take part. And there were a number of conversations along the form of, that had the form of, if you're willing to play ball, we could make a lot of money together, kid, kind of things. So startled, and that stuff around Greenwich, Connecticut started being thrown in my face. It was all coming from people in hedge funds associated with Stephen Keller. So I started getting very public about it. Anyway, what I discovered was, and I did all the things you're supposed to do. I went to the SEC and said, "Look, this is how they're doing this plan that they laid out to me." this is how things are going on. And I was told if you keep this up, you're going to come under federal investigation. I said, come on, this isn't like Paraguay. That doesn't happen here, right? I was told, just watch. And sure enough, I came under 6 federal investigations, none of which went anywhere, all of which cost like 7-figure numbers each and go away. But they just, I went to the Senate, I went from the SEC to the House Financial Services, Senate Banking, on and on. The financial press with hard economics, hard data, known economists with me vouching for all this. And what I discovered was the whole establishment is all just turtles all the way down. There's nothing there. So, what time do I have, by the way? Oh, great. So the solution to that has come along. The solution is blockchain. And in case you don't know, the real innovation is something called the blockchain. You can think of it like a ledger, like your granddad ran a hardware store out of a big ledger, but the whole world can read this ledger. And it's absolutely immutable. No one can cheat in the ledger, and it's cryptographically protected. No one can alter it, anything. It's a permanent record of the truth. You can use that to create a form of money. For example, Bitcoin. That's just a form of money created off this ledger that is recording how much each person has. You can do other things with it. And you can add it to, you can make one of the things we're doing, myself and Caitlin Long, who's a competitor at president of a company called Symbiont that's competing, but we're on the same mission, and that is to apply blockchain to the capital markets, because it means you can create a form of Wall Street that nobody can cheat, where all kinds of mischief that goes on actually becomes impossible in a blockchain-based capital market. I have to come up with a new name for Wall Street. Wall Street, no one can cheat. Called blockchain again. Well, there's blockchain voting and blockchain, all kinds of things coming down the path, but the key thing is you can take these institutions, which our founding fathers knew were ultimately prone, there's the theoretical design, but then how they operate over time and they get corrupted. Our founding fathers knew that, and they didn't have an answer to that. And Federalist number 10 more or less gives a very weak answer on, it even says we haven't really solved this problem as well as we wish we had. It actually says that. Well, blockchain is there. Blockchain lets us rebuild these institutions or really replace them. And I mean over 100. I've been in a stealth company in Silicon Valley where there's a wall with 160 institutions that they think they can disrupt. Because one way of looking at the growth of civilization has been for 6,000 years, the act of consensual exchange has forced us to build central institutions. I'm trading my camel for your gold coin. I don't know if your gold coin is debased or not. So the guy who has monopoly on violence in this oasis said monetize it by saying, I will print gold coins with my face on it, anyone who debases it, I kill. It's a business model to operate to monetize his monopoly on violence. So thus is born a mint. Land titling. We have land titling offices because I could say this piece of land, here's a piece of paper that says you own it, you don't know whether to trust it, so we all agree there's one office that has the single version of the truth. And what it says, when they change their books, that's when ownership is conveyed. Well, again, another institution that can be replaced with blockchain. Notary publics, all kinds of contracts. And Caitlin's group, and there's somebody else here working on smart contracts. You may see all kinds of contracts emerge through the blockchain You don't need lawyer, there's no role for judges. There's no role in a blockchain-based legal system where contracts self-execute. And when you're supposed to pay me this, when I deliver that, then there's some oracle, there's some source of truth that we all agree beforehand. When I deliver this, whatever the stipulation is, when that executes, this gets paid. It's all built into algorithms. There's nothing to dispute. You will see what the internet did to publishing. You will see the blockchain do to 100 or more institutions. And now those are the institutions that have basically civilization has evolved over time to solve this problem of consensual exchange. So what that means is, I think, if you think the internet's been disruptive, I think you're going to believe what the blockchain is going to do in that over just a short number of years. And the reason is the cost savings are so enormous, like 80 or 90% in a blockchain-based Wall Street. There's too much economic pressure not to do it. Lastly, I'm going to close on, I understand that there's a fewer people here this year, and that there's been a couple groups, couple factions are not participating. And I have to say that's all, I don't want to bring up too sensitive a subject, but I do want to address that. One of them is a guy who said some stuff about a 12-year-old gave his consent. So here's just like Milo Yiannopoulos said a few months ago, just, news flash on that subject. There's a couple other subjects that kind of linger around our community that I want to give you my stance on. One thing is 12-year-olds can't give consent. It's the essence of this whole philosophy of consent, that you're dealing with rational agents. And since a child isn't a rational agent, there is no such thing as consent. It's like saying my cat gave me consent. It doesn't make any sense. And those people are to be excluded. In addition, as fun as guns are, and we all love guns, and if you look me up, if you look up my name in mugshot, you'll look up the time I packed in a hurry, and I got to the airport, and my Glock was in my carry-on. When I got let out of jail the next morning, I opened my gun safe, and there were 4 pairs of socks. So I just packed in a hurry. That I understand there was someone else talking about the conditions under which violence against police is acceptable, and they are not welcome here anymore. And I'm reminded, and I'm so happy to hear that, because I wouldn't want to be around those type of people. And I want to close on the line of Jerry Garcia. Jerry Garcia, there's a great video of him up on YouTube, where he was talking about 1968, the Summer of Love, and how great it was, and we're out there, and hippie power, and flowers in the park, and everything. And they were having an anti-war demonstration, peaceful, and Ronald Reagan sent the National Guard. And he pointed out kind of the idiocy of that. It's already, it's a situation that can go many ways. Who in the right mind would think that's going to be made better by sending 500 armed soldiers? It's not going to make the situation better. But it was still cool. It was still cool, and everything was everything. And he says, he says in his interview, he says, that's the time that I just keep an eye on the crowd, because what I'm looking for is the guy who throws the first rock at the police. And that's how you know who the main asshole is. That's the main asshole in the crowd. And anyone who thinks that is going to advance our movement to tolerate that kind of thing is making a big mistake. I actually just came back from Moldova, and I was doing world stock stuff in Moldova. We do artisan artisans. And they told me a story in 2009. It was an election, and it was a fake election, and a pro-Russian guy got installed. And the people revolted. And there were demonstrations, but they were peaceful. And Putin sent thugs to infiltrate Moldova and to infiltrate the crowds and to lead the crowds into committing violence against the police, getting in fights, storming government buildings. And the reason he did that was Putin understood that the great middle, the middle class, just the middle, let's say, they're watching and they're wondering who to side with. And they may be sympathetic. They may have been sympathetic to those anti-government protesters, but if those anti-government protesters get violent, the middle class says, that's not who we're with. We're not with those people who are attacking the police and stuff. it's the great way to lose the masses. So it's a huge tactical mistake. It's unethical. I think that we have to be committed to the rule of law and fight our way through the system as we're doing. And as I've got to say, the Free State Project, which I first heard about so many years ago when I was running a little machine shop in Lebanon, New Hampshire, this may turn out to be the most successful policy innovation in the whole libertarian movement. So with that, thank you very much. We have time for 4 or 5 questions. Madam. Why don't I carry ammo? Funny you say that. I'm working on that right now. Check in a couple months. We're going to start selling parts associated with firearms. I'm not sure about the laws on ammo itself, but I have found somebody who can run that department for us, and I'm actually meeting him I'm meeting him Monday afternoon in Copenhagen. And he's coming back and he's going to build that department for us.
Franconia and Zappos.
I'm sorry?
Well, I'm Franconia, right? A town up here in the north. You know how Zappos or walking downtown in Vegas? Overstop to take one of these old little towns, make a branch office, crypto it, and let's build it.
Well, you know what's funny about that? I was with your governor yesterday. Caitlin and Steve and I were with your governor yesterday, who seems like a very fine guy, intelligent, I don't think we're going to see him here, but I think he's on our side. And I've been a believer in the Bartlett Foundation over the years, which is like the New Hampshire Cato. And he's hired a bunch of people from there, which I like. I think he's going to get there. We have to help him, but he's going to get there on us. But he told me about a building here, not far from here, a dozen miles from here, that we could do just something like that. And actually, on the way up here last night, we swung by the building and looked at it as a place we could put in a call center. So we're not promising anything, but that's actually worth exploring.
The last time I saw you speak here, you told a fantastical story about your close encounter with the Russian mafia, and it was like a spy novel or something. And my question after that was, how are you still alive?
I remember you the one who shouted that question out.
Yeah, well, no, legitimately came up to the mic and asked me. So hearing about your trying to get honesty from the SEC, I still have that same question. How are you alive when you were threatening the ill-gotten livelihood of so many thousands of people?
Well, that's a great question. I really remember the moment you said that. I thought how intelligent that was to get. Yeah, that was a series. I got death threats. I think I played you. Did I play you some recorded death threats? Oh, okay. I think I was still worried.
But I would like you to.
Okay. Maybe next time I'll play you some secret recordings of what it sounds like. I'm not involved in the conversation. One thug is talking to another person about their plans to kill Patrick Byrne. And actually, I have to give credit where credit is due. I stay away from the federal government as much as a guy can stay away in my position. But the lawyers insisted this all be reported. And I do have to say, some guys with badges and guns got in the grill of the people involved and explained to them that there are red lines in the geopolitics, and the red lines include you can't kill an American businessman on American soil. So that's what the message that was delivered, and everything's been everything. And I'm very careful when I travel abroad. I don't let it get people. But I was told the deal, but it was explained that you don't kill American businessmen on American soil, and even in that world, there are red lines that get defined. Thanks. I think that's why I'm still alive.
Hi.
So I do owe them they provide some useful service at times, let's remember.
Hi, I was reading about World Stock, and I read that 70% roughly of the profits go to the local artisans, and I wanted to commend you on that. I think that's incredibly impressive. I have a specific question. I live in Colombia, and we're a society that's emerging from 55 years of civil war. Have you looked into what is World Stock doing in Latin America in general, and do you do anything in Colombia in particular, particularly along the Pacific coast, which has incredible potential for development, and where there are a lot of indigenous peoples that have been caught in the crossfire between the government and between these various paramilitary and guerrilla groups?
Great question, thank you for asking. First, we do better than that. We give not 70% of the profits, we give 70%, 60 to 70% of what you spend. If you're buying something for $100, 60 to 70 of that is getting back to the actual group. And all the rest, we have our own logistics. We run that thing to make no profit at break even. And when we have made profit, we use it to build schools. We've built 26 schools around the world, educating about 6,000 kids, 6,000 to 8,000, most of them female. We're a big believer in female education. So it's I think it's maybe the largest fair trade group in the world. We are doing about 25 million a year. We have sent well over 100 million back to artisans. Now, to your specific question, in Latin America, a lot of great products we had in the early days. I'm not as familiar with what's on it now. A lot of great products. We had in Peru hundreds of people making us wooden stools and such, and leather and wood ottomans, really nice. These aren't sympathy products. These aren't like buy this something or other to support a cause. These are like boutique level products. Colombia I've been to once on World Stock Business. There were women on some island, an incredibly destitute island, who take plastic, gum wrappers and stuff, and they weave handbags out of them. And apparently in some circles in Europe, these are considered very posh. We had in Villa de Yevras, in the mountain, the village of Lips, and the mountain.
Villa de Yevras?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Boyacá. That's just north of Bogotá.
Yeah. So I was there, and there was a co-op making lamps and stuff for us. So in some of these places, we can sort of support everything we can take everything they can make. So, but we have a new head of World Stock, and it is going in a new direction of World Stock. We're getting more aggressive about expanding it. I'll make sure we look at Latin America. Thank you. All right, five more questions.
I started getting involved with you when I Overstock started taking Bitcoin.
I'm sorry?
I know Patrick.
Hi.
I started getting involved with you when Overstock started getting into Bitcoin, accepting Bitcoin. Then I followed the Wall Street issue that you had. And then T0 I started looking at, and I started following the T0. I printed that. Last year I seen that they were doing stock options for that with the T0 with Overstock.com. I kind of lost track of that, and I was just curious how the T0 is actually going.
T0.
That might be off track now.
No, that's good. That's good. You're right on. So we're taking, and some of our blockchain developers are sitting right here. 4 of them, I think. We have groups that work on blockchain meets voting, blockchain meets identification, blockchain meets central banking. Boy, do we have something big coming down the pipe there. And blockchain meets Wall Street, and a few others. The blockchain meets Wall Street, T0. We did the world's first blockchain bond 2 years ago. We got the first SEC permission, albeit begrudgingly, to issue a public blockchain security. That was 1.5 years ago, then 6 months ago, we issued the world's first public blockchain security. You can go to a broker called Keystone. Unfortunately, at this point, you have to be signed up with one broker to be able to trade it. But anyone can go at any time to Keystone, open an account, and you can buy a public blockchain security that's regulated by the SEC. It's kind of I like to think it's a red letter date in history when that happened. We have other things coming out of that group. In fact, I'm on my way over to Copenhagen in order to make a talk on Wednesday, keynoting at a great big financial tech conference called Money 2020. And I anticipate announcing something pretty disruptive there.
I have an interest in educational choice here in New Hampshire, but I'm not familiar with ed choice that's mentioned up there. I wonder if you could say a few words about that.
Love to. Milton Friedman, George Shultz was once asked who was the most important man he ever knew. He said, all the kings and presidents and ministers and ambassadors I ever knew, the single most important one was an academic scribbler from Chicago named Milton Friedman. Milton came up with the idea of school choice in 1955. He devoted the last decade of his life to it. His foundation. He invited me to take over his foundation at his death. He asked us that we keep it, so it was the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. Now that was a mouthful, and we also promised him that we would use his name for 10 years. He didn't want his name on anything in perpetuity, because funny things happen over time in foundations. So we had to change it after 10 years, and we just changed it to Ed Choice. But it is the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation. Just changed its name.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last question? What? One more?
May I ask a question? 2 points. First, your comments about why this event might be a little smaller than previous years, and the divides that are happening. It's very politically astute. Thank you for saying that.
I'm not politically astute. You'll learn I'm the least politically astute guy.
So you talked about how the seed of God is in each of us, and that's really the foundation of libertarianism, I think.
Respect.
Equal respect for us. We're talking about this new crypto world order. I'll trademark that phrase right now.
That's a great one. I get mental trademark.
But it's really about how keeping some level of mystery about each of us makes us more equal. And so I guess I want to ask you about a future possible moment in history. And I'll describe it this way. There's a court case, and it's a contract dispute, and yet the contract is a smart contract on a blockchain, and no human individual can change it. And the judge bangs his gavel and demands an outcome, but no one can comply. And I think in that moment is when this new order happens, and I think it's very. So, have you ever thought about that? And how would you describe that moment?
That's a good question. I think that the particulars are, in that case, that contract only exists because the two parties entered into it. And they agreed, suppose it's an orange farmer in Florida who he's got $1 million orange crop, and every 5 years it's killed by frost, so he buys a derivative that says if there's a frost this year, I get paid $1 million. So that's why these derivatives exist, or came into existence, so farmers and people can hedge their risk in the world. They've kind of been taken over by speculators. But that kind of a contract will be set by, it will be programmed to look up on the Weather Channel. Was there a frost this last week? And if there was, it pays the money this way. If there wasn't, it pays it that way. So I don't even think it can get in front. Maybe it doesn't even get in front of a group. And the thing is, it's not. If it's all automatic, there's nothing to judge. Whatever he decides doesn't matter. The payments are all sort of occurring out there in this world of crypto, outside of any government control. But it is what the two people agreed to. So it really has a libertarian strong theme to it. I will say I'm not blind to the story of Frankenstein. It was really a story. Frankenstein wasn't the monster; it was the doctor, and he was a young scientist. And the story so carried away with what he could do that he didn't give sufficient thought to that science can create things that wreak havoc on the world. And although I'm like the Bitcoin revolutionary, I actually am attuned to, we're going to be disrupting a lot of institutions. And if you think what the internet has done to corporations and government, this is going to be even more powerful. And I want us to be prudent as we go. It's funny, sometimes I'm out there in groups and it's young folk. A lot of these conversations occur offshore because some of these people don't even want to come back onshore. It's funny people in this community. One guy got jailed for something. He almost was a political prisoner in all of this. And he was, anyway, he got afoul of the ATF. And they, because he was a libertarian candidate actually for something, and he got in all this trouble and ended up in jail. When he came out, he had like 120 grand to his name, and he sunk it into Bitcoin at nothing, and he's now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There's those kinds of people in this community, and they really wanted to burn everything down. They're okay with burning everything down. I want us to be prudent. I want us to burn everything down. Let's stand there with fire hoses and see and think about it as we go. Because I think this is going to be really disruptive. Okay, it really is such an honor, and I commit, I'll read out right now.
I just want to make a quick announcement. We're doing the group photo immediately after this. Please go directly to the field right where I'm pointing. We're going to do the group photo, and then Bardo Farm is going to have the pig roast right under the lower picnic table right outside.